Coming up on this episode of Nintendo Cartridge Society, we make like Commander Adam Malkovich and issue some orders for Metroid Prime 4. It's dangerous to go alone, so the Nintendo Cartridge Society goes with you. Welcome to Nintendo Cartridge Society. My name is Patrick Ellers, and I am joined, as I am always joined, by my co-host, Mark Mitchell. Mark, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Patrick, before we started recording this, you and I were both having to laugh at Commander Adam Malkovich's expense because we were looking at his costume or his outfit or his uniform, I guess you would call it.
Definitely a uniform, yes, 100%.
He looks like a waiter on a cruise ship. It's not a great look.
I mean, I don't even know if he looks like a waiter. I feel like the waiter uniform is a little bit more understated. It's more just like a tight T-shirt.
You're
or
right.
Like
you're right.
Button-down
You're
shirt.
totally
like
right.
He's one of those like people who's like amorphously a member of the crew of the cruise ship. You don't know what he does. He stands around a lot with like his hands behind his back, just kind of like watching people at the pool. He's not the lifeguard.
He's not the lifeguard.
Before we get into, because we've got a good episode today, we are going to be talking about what we want to see and what we want to not see in Metroid Prime 4. But before that, I just wanted to mention that I'm watching Batman Beyond and rediscovering it because it is all up on HBO Max. And I don't know why this never occurred to me, but Batman Beyond is just Batman plus Spider-Man plus the future.
Ooh, it sounds like that's a winning combination.
It's a winning combination. And I'm just shouting out a cartoon from 25 years ago.
I haven't seen it for probably that long.
It has all of like the drawbacks of like a DC animated show. But is really good and imaginative, and like for something that should have never worked, like make Batman a teenager, it totally works. It's great.
Yeah, that's cool.
Speaking of things that should never work, the Sonic Forces borrowing program. Would you like to borrow my copy of Sonic Forces for the Nintendo Switch? You can. All you gotta do is email us at Nintendo Cartridge Society at gmail.com and give us a mailing address where we can send this thing to you. But Mark, what might happen?
You might get Untitled Goose Game instead.
You might. There's a very real possibility that the goose will sneak in there, and the copy of Sonic Forces will become Untitled Goose Game. And either way, you got to play it.
There's nothing you can do.
That's right. We're all powerless against the goose. Something else that we are all powerless against next week, we are doing our 433rd episode. Time marches ever onward, Mark. Which means we are doing a whole episode of 433s that are just topics proposed and suggested by you. So email us at Nintendo Cartridge Society at gmail.com if you have a topic you would like us to talk about for 4.5 minutes plus an additional 3 seconds. We need those by next week, Tuesday, February 9th. So if you heard us say this before and you're like, I'll get to it, I got time. You no longer have time.
Time is running
until Tuesday. Time is running out. Mark is giving you good advice. Get in, email us. Thank you to Josh and thank you to Martin who have already sent in suggestions, and everyone else who has done so earlier. We appreciate it, but the more the merrier. More suggestions, send them our way. Mark, are you ready to get into it?
Yeah, let's do it.
Now, just to establish like what we're doing, why it's relevant, it has now been approximately 2 years.
A little over 2 years, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Since
Go for it. You set us up.
All right. Since it's been a little over 2 years since it was announced that Metroid Prime 4 was getting rebooted under Retro Studios. I think it happened in like January of 2019. We got word that the game was being rebooted.
A cause for some excitement, right? Because like we knew Metroid Prime 4 was coming. That had been teased a while back, but there were no details about who was working on it or like what the game was going to be like at all. we still have no idea what the game will be like at all. Like, honestly, nothing other than Retro Studios, the studio that made the original Metroid Prime and Prime 2 and Prime 3, is back on the case. Nintendo was not satisfied with what was happening, and they were like, someone else has got to do it. We got to start all over. And now that has been chugging for about 2 years. So we think it is time for us to like weigh in and say what we would like to see now that it's already 2 years into it. What we would like to see in the new Metroid Prime game.
That's right. So Patrick and I have each come up with 4 things we want to see in Metroid Prime 4, and then also 4 things that we don't want to see. I'm I'm wondering, Patrick, if the way we should do this is we should like compliment sandwich Metroid Prime 4. So maybe we each give something we want to see, and then we each give something we don't want to see. That way we're not ending the episode by just talking about 4 things we don't want to see.
Yeah, that is a great point. And I think for the last one, for the final point, we should talk about something we don't want to see and then something we do want to see. So we're ending on high notes.
Yes. Yeah, that seems fair. And just.
Yes. We are nothing if not just and fair on this show. Mark, would you like to go first or would you like to go second?
I would love for you to go first, Patrick.
Okay. So, me going first, the first thing that I would like to see in a new Metroid game, and this is specific, so bear with me. Whatever the story is, I wrote this whole thing out, it's a paragraph, I apologize. Whatever the story is, it needs to be driven by Samus's priorities and values. By which I mean specifically her conservation and her affection for weird little space animals. That's something that we know about her. She likes the Metroid itself. She likes that weird green ostrich thing. She likes those little green monkeys. This means that I don't want her to be reactionary. I don't want her to be taking orders, and I don't want this to be a bounty hunting job. Those are all stories that make her an instrument of someone else's agency. This needs to be her exercising her own agency, which means I also don't want her to be abandoned or lost or stranded. She should choose to be in the situation all on her own. And if we need to like depower her, then we do it because she's like, I don't want to harm the local fauna in this area. And so that she can depower herself on her own if she wants to, but like she has to want it. That is my main want for a new Metroid game.
Can I do something maybe a little, especially since I just set up the rules of engagement here, but like something a little unorthodox and chime in and say completely I agree with that. And in fact, it it pairs so neatly with one of my don't want to sees that I feel compelled to share it right now. Which is that
this is great because I also have a don't want to see that pairs perfectly.
Okay,
with it.
Perfect.
So let's hear yours first.
All right, mine is I don't want to see I do not want it to involve the Galactic Federation. I want the involvement of the Galactic Federation to be significantly reduced. And like I completely agree with you that I would love it the story or the forward action to be motivated by like Samus herself and based on like her beliefs and like her agency. And totally. I feel like in especially the later Metroid Prime games, like the Federation's role just kept like growing and growing. And in, Metroid Prime 3 and Corruption, you were in the beginning, you spent like a lot of time on the Federation spaceship. You were talking to a lot of members of the Federation. Federation
and bounty hunters hired by the Federation.
Yeah, like it became too militaristic for me. Like it's so like Samus is like part of this military organization. You're like, okay, like it happened so like gradually where you're just like, like you didn't really question it, but I feel like it lost a lot of what makes Samus so interesting and like so unique in the world of video games. And so to have it just become another kind of like military shooter essentially is disappointing.
It's a real problem.
And so I agree with you completely, and I would love to see I think they exist in the universe. It's fine for them to exist and be a part of it. We don't have to pretend that the Federation doesn't exist, but I would like their role to be significantly reduced.
So I actually, now that we are doing this, maybe now you do a positive and then I'll do a negative and a positive, and so we kind of go back and forth that way.
Okay, sure. Yeah. We'll see how this works.
Yeah, we'll
Um,
see. Look, and if we want to withdraw from how we're doing it, then we can reformat at any time. I feel great about it.
okay, so my first something I want to see from Metroid Prime 4 is survival horror elements.
Yes.
So what I would love is like I don't think Metroid Prime 4 should be a survival horror game, but I would love to see a planet or an environment that is scary. Because I think one of the fun things about the Metroid games, any of them, is that like that sense of isolation, and it's like,
Mhm.
and it's going back to that like the original Metroid is such a riff on those late 70s, early 80s sci-fi films like Aliens and
Yes.
Alien. And so one example that's not a Nintendo game, but I think of all the time in this is, did you ever play Thief Deadly Shadows? It's like the third
No,
Thief game. So I never
did not.
played it, but because I never had a gaming PC, but my friend did. And so I would basically just like go over to his house and watch him play Thief. And like the game is really, really cool. And it's not a survival horror game at all. But there is one level in the third game that's called, it takes place in this place called Shalebridge Cradle, which is, get this, it's an abandoned insane asylum that was built in an old orphanage. So it was an orphanage
Okay,
that got
come
turned
on.
into an insane asylum.
Sure. Okay. I mean that's like burying that's like making a toxic waste dump on an Indian burial ground. Like you're double dipping.
And this level is so like the sound design and everything is so scary. And the rest of the game is not like survival horror at all. It's like a thief game. You're creeping around in the shadows, like stealing stuff. And then this level is just kind of like pulls the rug out from under you, but in a really like cool, memorable way. Or I guess even like from a Nintendo example is like in the latest Yoshi game. There's that one
Oh,
weird
yeah.
level with the like clowns that have axes that you have to like
man.
stay in the
Can
light.
Do you remember what the name of that level is? Because I feel like it's something along the lines of "If he sees you, run."
Yeah, I think it is something
Yeah.
like that. Yeah. And so I would love to see something like that in Metroid Prime 4, where it's just like, okay, we're just gonna take this one like planet and it's just super weird and creepy and kind of like survival horror-ish. And then, like that's it. Doesn't have to be the whole game. It's just something like unique and memorable.
Let me ask you this: would you want that to be connected to a zero suit situation that Samus
Ooh.
finds herself now without her main power armor and has to just like get by with whatever she has on her?
Yeah, that would be interesting. Because I feel like, for all the riffs that we have on, I guess what I feel like is like Metroid games and like Corruption was like this, and even Samus Returns was like this. Like I feel like they are focusing a lot on combat, but I also feel like by having you encounter like so many enemies like all the time and having to fight all of them, the enemies aren't really like scary or that interesting. They just become like cannon fodder. And so I think
Yeah.
having this like break where it's like, yeah, like she is Zero Suit Samus and she just has to like use the environment or whatever to
Just
escape.
has to sneak around.
Yeah, would be, I think, really cool.
That's great. And one of my wants kind of ties into that, but I'll save it for later. I think it's still like different enough. But so moving on to my first don't want. I do not want a lot of voice acting and or other characters with speaking lines, which goes along with your like Federation thing. I want the Galactic Federation out. I added to a note here that human antagonists are fine, but I want their motivation to be institutional and not personal. So like no one can have a vendetta against Samus or whatever. They can be like army dudes that she gets rid of. Like that's fine. But like I think your note of like just no army dudes at all, also great. But just generally speaking, like I don't need her to speak. And I certainly don't need like big monologues. I don't want to like go out of the way to not have voice acting. But like I don't that's not something that I value in these games. I want her to mostly be alone. I want it to I want that isolation to come through.
Totally. I completely agree.
That's good because it's basically just the no Federation. It's basically the same note, or functionally the same note. Okay, so my next want And this is one that this feels inspired to me. I want more morph forms or more morph abilities, more abilities for the morph ball. Okay, so Samus famously can turn into a little ball and roll around. It's what they had to do in the original game because they couldn't animate her crawling, right? Um, and in the Prime games, there's nothing quite as satisfying or as cool or unique in those games as when you switch from first person to third person and you're rolling around in this little ball, right? And it's such a weird, mythologically speaking, what is happening there? Has any game like delved into like, hold on a minute, Samus has become a ball, like a she's an orb. Her entire being is inside this little tiny orb. What's happening there? Why can she transform? I want to see more transformations. Samus becoming other objects, other shapes, capable of moving around the environment in different ways. And or just more power-ups for the morph ball. Mark, are you familiar with the various power-ups that have already been featured for the morph ball?
No, I would love for you to run them down.
So there are, of course, the bombs, kind of basic. She drops bombs. The hyper bomb from Super Metroid and other games, which is just a bigger bomb. The spring ball, which allows the ball to jump. The spider ball, which allows it to cling to surfaces, and in the Prime games, cling to surfaces that are like tracks specifically designed for it. And then there's the charge ball in some of the Prime games that like allows the ball to dash. And then there are also two more. There's the force ball in Metroid Prime Pinball, which turns the ball into like a green spiky energy thing. And the hyper ball in Prime 3, which is basically just like a different hyper bomb, essentially. But like all of those things, I feel like we know what the morph ball is capable of. I want it to be tested. I want to see like, can we launch the morph ball? Can it like travel through different surfaces or something? Like, I really want to. It's such a cool moment when she turns into that ball and the camera like zooms way out so you can see what's happening, and just like, I just want more of that moment in the new Metroid Prime.
It is especially cool in Metroid Prime when that happens.
And we're talking about a Prime game, so I mean, like, it would have to happen in this one. Also, I think the idea that she could morph into other shapes is so like compelling. I have no suggestions for what those other shapes would be.
I know this is not your intention, but I'm imagining like a boy in his blob scenario where she's turned into like a ladder, a parasol, a trampoline,
a hole that you can fall through. Which I guess then gives you a do not want next.
Okay, all right. I think this is probably my last kind of like honestly it's just in the same vein as the ones we've already been talking about, but it's like I don't want, what I do not want to see is unskippable cutscenes. If you are going to have cutscenes, and look, I know that this is
skip them.
Let me skip them. And yes, is this like, are some of these complaints fresh? Well, fresh in quotes because the game is like 10 years old at this point for Metroid Prime Other M. Yeah, but like
there's no Prime in that title. It's just
Metroid Other M. But like, yes, that game has unskippable cutscenes, and it's awful. Don't do that to me. Let me skip your cutscenes.
I would be willing to wager that there are unskippable cutscenes in Metroid Prime 3.
I can't remember. Yeah, I can't remember.
Yeah, I can't remember either. It's tough. I mean, one of the things that is so difficult about making this list is that I feel like none of the Prime games are fresh in my head.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
But yeah, absolutely. Let me more than letting me skip cutscenes, like, don't put so much weight into them, right? Like, the more you give me story, the more I am comforted by the fact that there is a story. And as discussed, we want survival horror elements in this thing.
Okay, so my second thing I want to see in the game is I want to see Ridley have a sister, and Ridley's sister is named Ripley.
Wow.
So let me explain this. It is a flight of fancy, but I just think Ridley's not very exciting anymore. Like, Ridley is going to show
Mhm.
up at some point in the game. Maybe it's going to be Ridley. Maybe he's going to have like an exoskeleton. Maybe he'll be a ghost. I mean, but it's just not like that exciting.
Yeah.
So, what I'm proposing is that we have an opportunity to learn more about Ridley's species, which we know nothing about.
Nothing about.
And I think we should, like, Ridley should have a sister, and Ridley's sister should be named Ripley. And I want to see a Metroid version of the two T-Rex attack from the second Jurassic Park movie, The Lost World. Like, I'm
Yes.
imagining a scenario where you're like in a tight corridor, and Ripley and Ridley are like trying to like peck at you
battering it
through
from
like
either side.
exactly.
Yeah, you're like in the ship or something, and
Yes.
they're like knocking it around. That's great.
I mean, I guess the other thing you could do is like we could just retcon like Ridley entirely and say like no, these are not the same Ridleys. These are like the sharks from Jaws, where they're just all like you just kind of know them as Jaws, even though they're never called that. And so it's like no, like Ridley died super long time ago. This is just like another Ridley who's out for revenge.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, as long as we are jettisoning the mythology of the Galactic Federation, let's introduce some of the mythology of what Ridley's people are about, right?
Yeah, I completely
Let's get them in here.
Let's go to their planet. Let's do all of it. Let's demystify Ridley.
Yeah, well, but by sort of like remystifying Ridley, right? Like knowing more about this, because like Ridley is like a noteworthy nemesis for Samus in a way that like there really isn't another, right? Like
Right.
Mother Brain sort of exists on that continuum, but like it's not personal with Mother Brain, it's personal with Ridley.
Yeah.
Ridley freaks Samus out. And if we were to find out more about that and be like are these things bred like to hunt Samus Aran? Like what is the relationship here? Why does Ridley keep showing back up in her life?
Yeah, and also I think like it would be fun to see like Ridley in his element because like it's like when you see Darth Vader on Mustafar and you've like heard about Mustafar, but then you like see Darth Vader's like castle and you're like, whoa, that's like Darth Vader's castle. And I kind of want that. I kind of want that with Ridley. Like I feel like it's like I've had too much Ridley, but at the same time I need different Ridley. Like I need like a reason to care again.
Yeah, well, because I think you're right. Like there is something that he has been a little demystified. The ability to play as him in Smash Brothers has ruined the character. We don't respect that power, and it's out now, right? Like that's what's happened.
Yeah,
we need to reestablish Ridley's menace.
Completely.
I have no idea where we are in the lineup. Who does what next?
I think you say something you don't want to see.
All right, great. So this is maybe again more just ragging on Other M, but Fusion is also guilty of this. I do not want Samus to be stuck on a spaceship the whole time. Other M and Fusion find like interesting ways around this by like having simulated biomes on the ship itself. But and while that may like kind of superficially address the issue, it does not make it so that Samus is interacting with local ecology, which I've already established is the thing that drives her. That's the thing she cares about. And we're turning it into holograms? No, thank you. Samus, look, she can spend some time in a ship or a space station, but like she will not be trapped there for the entirety of a game. I can't deal with it again. If they're going to be like, oh yeah, this is a fake forest. Get out of here. I want real trees.
Yeah, I think that's a great one. I mean, I completely agree. And like I do think the Prime series specifically has always been very good about this.
Yes.
Like, but definitely the more recent games, again in air quotes because it's been a decade, are not like super great at this.
Right. I mean, two pretty bad examples of it in Other M and Fusion.
So I think now it's something you do want to see.
So now it's something I do want. Okay, this is a quick one. Thank you, Mark, for keeping track because this is one that I suggested the format and now it's getting away from me. This is a quick one and I think is pretty similar to what you had said earlier. I just want to be scared.
Mm-hmm.
You know, whether it is through like survival horror elements or like resource management or enemies that can like one shot kill you or whatever. I just want to be scared. I want to feel like a sense of isolation. I want to feel as though the thing that Samus is taking on is so huge that there's no possible way that she could make it. Like, I want real stakes. And I man, so much ragging on Other M here, but like the way that Other M takes away the stakes by being like Samus has all of her power ups, but she can't use them because someone told her not to is such garbage. Like it makes the whole thing feel like a video game.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like if she's really life threatened at any moment, she could just flip all the stuff back on and like get to it. I want that not to be the case here. I want to be scared.
Well, that kind of again dovetails nicely into my next like something I don't want to see, which is I don't want to see too much combat. I feel like
Yeah.
Metroid Prime Corruption, kind of it came out just at a really interesting time because it was coming from the GameCube controller, which was not set up for a first-person shooter, and so the Metroid Prime games, the first two, were not like they weren't promoted as first-person shooters. They were like first-person adventure
Right.
games or like adventure shooters, and they really like leaned into that. I felt like whereas Corrupt, but it was always chafing against this uh, like limitation of the control scheme, and so when they were moved on to the Wii and they had the pointer controls, it was a natural progression, and kind of I think something that fans wanted, which was like, okay, great, like now it like really opens up the combat. Like I can really treat this as like a shooter. And that never like clicked for me. Like I didn't like
Yeah.
Corruption that much. Partly I actually didn't think the control scheme was that great. But also like
Yeah,
I didn't love.
I'm right there with you. I think the pointer controls, the Wii controls for all the Prime games, they do it a disservice.
And I also didn't love its like transformation into more of just a traditional like
Yep.
shooter. And so I would love to see Metroid Prime 4 return to, or I want it to embrace like the puzzle solving environmental stuff of the first couple of games. And I think combat is obviously still a part of it, but I would love it to be like de-emphasized.
Good. That's yeah. I think that's perfect. And when you say like puzzle solving, like exploration is so much a
Yeah.
part of like the sort of planetary puzzle that those games pose. That yeah, I don't really think you need the combat because like that's what it is, but the environmental puzzle solving is really what that game is all about.
So I guess that kind of goes into the next thing I do want to see, which
Mm-hmm.
is I would love to see a co-op side story in Metroid Prime
Yeah,
4.
baby.
So I know that the Metroid Prime games have
Mm-hmm.
had multiplayer in the past, like Metroid Prime 2 Echoes had like just a traditional like death match essentially.
Yeah.
There's of course Metroid Prime Hunters for the Nintendo DS, and then Federation Force on the 3DS, which is like a Metroid Prime spin-off. But I would like to see something that's more like traditional Metroid Prime, but with two like bounty hunters and like with a focus on like co-op puzzle solving. And sure, there's like some combat and probably like a boss you have to fight at the end of each of these like levels. But really what I'm interested in is like having two players have to work together to
Yeah.
traverse like the environment and figure out like how do we work together to get from point A to point B. And there were like there were in I actually haven't played Call of Duty for a while, so I'm not sure. But there were a few Call of Duty entries a few years ago that they would have like you wouldn't play the main mission in co-op, but they had these like special co-op missions, and that's kind of what I'm imagining because I don't really want like a Resident Evil 5 type thing where you play through the entire thing in co-op,
Sure.
but I
Yeah.
would love to have that like co-op experience, and I feel like that's the a really to me it makes sense to do it that way in Metroid Prime instead of like a death match again.
Yeah, I mean, oh man, maybe like a year ago on the show we did an episode with Christian Hume about our like co-op gaming experiences that we liked, and I think we each brought like games that aren't actually co-op that we still played in a room with other people. And Prime One and Prime Two were both games that I played in my apartment with a bunch of people around, remembering where stuff was, remembering where doors were as soon as I got an item. And like, I think there is, if they could push us towards a co-op experience or like an online co-op experience, because we can't gather in person right now, that would go a long way towards sort of revitalizing that feeling of playing the game together, because you actually are playing it together.
Yeah, that would be fun.
This may seem, my next unwant here, my next do not want, may seem like it is a counterpoint to what you just said. But I do not want to see a Samus doppelganger of any kind.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to see Dark Samus. I don't want to see Virus Samus. I don't want to see a Metroid, but it's Samus. Like, let let's leave let's leave that sci-fi weirdness out of it, because we've been there. Like, we have been to evil versions of Samus. Dark Samus, we don't need it. We're just, she can fight threats that are like measurable and understandable without having to like, there was a second here where I was like, do I want no like light world dark world mechanic? Because that's something that's huge in Prime 2 Echoes. And I think I don't want that, but mostly just as a function of, I don't want to see an evil version of Samus. I got no use for it.
Yeah, I mean, and even in like the Prime games themselves, we got like two good like whole games out of it that like both Metroid Prime 2 and Metroid Prime 3 um kind of revolve around a corrupted version of Samus. And so yeah,
Yeah.
like I actually, it's interesting because when I was making my list, I was kind of things that I do want to see. I was thinking like, oh, what like sci-fi tropes or like what from sci-fi movies or even the Aliens franchise like has happened but we haven't seen end up in Metroid yet. And initially I was like, oh yeah, what if they cloned her? And then like I started to think about it a little bit more and I was like, oh no, she's essentially been cloned like a
she's
million
been duplicated
times.
over and over again.
Yeah.
Yeah. They won't stop making extra Samuses.
Yeah.
But so if there is 2-player co-op online, I just hope it's not that there are 2 Samuses. That's all I'm saying. So that brings me to my final want, I think. I want some EVA, which of course stands for extra vehicular activity in space, which means I want Samus outside of a spaceship at some point.
Ooh.
Either connected like by a tether or like magnetic boots or something, and she can be like moving between like Federation spaceships as she like approaches a planet or something. But I want like a little bit of like just a little bit of gravity in there. The movie Gravity, the Sandra Bullock movie, where like that feeds into like the horror element of it, where like one wrong move and you're just gonna be floating off into space forever. But I feel like that's also an environment that they don't really trade in at all.
Totally.
In these games. And it just would be a cool setting. She's always in space already. Let's have her deal with the fact that, space itself can be an adversary.
Yeah, that would be really cool because I feel like we have seen more and more like Samus's ship become part of the gameplay. Like in Metroid Prime 3 Corruption, you could call her ship and it would do an airstrike on like certain areas. And you spent like a little bit more time in the ship, but we've never like we are in outer space, but we are never like in outer space in Metroid Prime.
We are never of outer space.
Yeah, yes. That's right. That's right.
Well, and like, I mean, I know it's never going to be like a hard sci-fi series, right? But like just borrowing some of the elements of like the perilousness of being in space, the fact that it's as cold as it is, that it's a vacuum, that one wrong move and like you're lost forever, is so ripe for like gameplay challenges and like exciting storytelling that like let's get into it. Let's embrace it. You're in space, baby.
Okay, so my final thing that I don't want to see in Metroid Prime 4 is I don't want to see the immersion and attention to details that makes like the Metroid Prime series so good and memorable disappear.
Yes.
Like Metroid Prime, like the Metroid Prime games are they do like some things that are just like so like cool and thoughtful. Like I remember playing the first game and like you never see Samus's face except if like there's like a flash of light or something, and then you see her reflection like in the visor that you're looking through.
It's so
Or
cool.
when you're on planets where it's raining, if you are just walking straight forward, like a few drops will get on your visor. And then if you look up, if you look straight up into the sky, like lots of drops will get on your visor. Like it's like those like tiny like attention to detail atmospheric things that really like so much of what makes Metroid Prime, especially that first one, so memorable was like that attention to detail and
Yeah.
like the environmental storytelling. And I really would love. I mean, I have no reason to think they won't include that in Metroid Prime 4, but that is something that is very important to me.
Well, let's talk about that for a second, because I think you're right that like they will continue to pay attention to detail, but I think one of the things that I worry about with this new game is that it's not going to be able to execute just graphically on the same level as other games that we see coming out of other studios on other platforms right now, right? Like Metroid Prime, especially for a GameCube game, looks incredible. But it was going like toe to toe with everything else on the other platforms, like at that same time. Even when it boxes above its weight, basically, visually speaking. And I don't know if the Switch still has that ability. Like I think it probably does, right? Because like Breath of the Wild looks great, Mario Odyssey looks great. But like those are all games in a very specific like art style that can like kind of cut some of those corners. Um, but yeah, I mean, I believe in retro and I believe in Metroid Prime. So like maybe they'll get there.
Yeah, that's a good point because the Metroid series and Metroid Prime is more like realistic, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
And so, like, Breath of the Wild looks amazing, but is benefits from its like painterly art style. Mario Odyssey looks great, but is again benefits from
It's a
that like
cartoon, yeah.
yeah, from the cartoon aesthetic. And I agree with you that I believe that there are ways that they can do it with like art design and everything, but it is more of a challenge than it was in the GameCube days for sure.
Yeah. Well, and that's also interesting too that like the house style for Metroid as a series is realistic, right?
Yeah.
Like or like sort of anime realistic. It's a Final Fantasy The Spirits Within. That's the design aesthetic.
Well, I think it's honestly another reason to not rely very heavily on the Galactic Federation, because if it's like
Totally.
the first game where you're not really interacting with humans, then you don't have that problem as much because then you're looking at the environment and
Yeah.
alien designs, which you have much more flexibility with. But it's when you're in, you're on the Galactic Federation mothership and you're talking and you're getting orders from everybody that
Oh, God.
like it would just become a
Please
lot
no.
harder
Please no.
because you have to render like humans.
Right. Right. So let's render as few humans as possible in this game.
So I think you should go ahead and do your last don't want to see, and then we'll end on my want to see.
Okay. You have a want to see left over?
I do,
still?
yeah.
Oh yeah, because I started with a want to see. That makes sense. Okay. So my final do not want to see is maybe this is impossible, but I do not want this game to be another interquill. I don't want it to be a capstone to the end of the Prime series, which is still necessarily like in the timeline of Samus's life takes place before Metroid 2, right? Um they're saying that this game is called Metroid Prime 4. I don't even know that has to be true, right? I think it only needs to be a Prime game in like perspective and gameplay. If they give it a different subtitle that is not Prime and they call it something else, I would prefer that, and I would like it to take place at the end of this timeline. Like, I don't think it makes a lot of sense to just keep cramming games in between other events forever. Like, let's open up a door and create a space for new games, for new stories after what's already known.
Especially if we're never going to see, because like I agree with you, and like I feel like the Metroid Prime trilogy has pretty much told like its main story.
Totally.
And I'm sure there are threads from the third game that they could pick up into the fourth, but I also feel like it feel in look, there are rumors that like a 2D Metroid is being worked on by Mercury Steam, like the same people who made the Samus Returns remake. But I fear that we're never going to get like a proper follow-up to Fusion, like a Metroid 5. And so I
right.
would love for Metroid Prime 4 to be that. Like, I agree with you. Like, let's jump ahead in the timeline. Let's not call it Metroid Prime 4. Um, but if it has that DNA, but is a just new Metroid game, I would love that.
Yeah.
I'm totally on board.
Yeah. Let's call it Metroid Omega. It can be about the end of Samus's career, and then we can do a whole trilogy of those games and a bunch of spin-offs that everyone resents. Like that's fine. But like I think that is, well, it's great that they're bringing back the series Metroid Prime specifically. I think what really needs to happen is just like a new injection of energy and creativity into the Metroid series. Um, and if that may be the creation of a new Metroid series
Yeah,
that just looks like Prime.
I agree. I wonder, because I feel like why Metroid Prime was successful was it. Actually, I don't know if I want to go down this road because I think I'm going to mess the names up. But basically, what like, I like, I guess what I'll say is that I think like Other M did not benefit from having the hands of the Metroid creator like on it. I think
Yeah.
what Metroid almost needs right now is what Star Wars got, which is just like people who like grew up loving Metroid and then having an opportunity to like recreate that magic for a new generation is kind of what I think like Metroid Prime did, and I think what the Metroid Prime series needs again.
Yeah, it just needs it's something new, right? Like a reason for us to revisit this. And like it's so weird that like I don't think that is necessary, and certainly hasn't been the case like recently for like the most recent Mario and Zelda games have been like pretty backwards looking. Not that they're not like progressive, fun, cool games that are doing new things, but like always with an eye towards the past. And I think Metroid benefits from not looking backwards, from just like plowing forward and like doing new stuff. That's what I want to see.
Yeah, because like the thought of another 2D Metroid in like the vein of Samus Returns is like not super exciting to me.
Yeah, I mean, I'll play it, but like I totally get what you mean. Where I mean, even Samus Returns, right? Like Metroid Prime 2, the remake of it, was cool, and I liked it a lot. It's a game that I 100%ed on my 3DS after I was no longer playing my 3DS. But like it doesn't feel like a new entry in the series. It feels like a fun like side thing that I supplemented my normal Metroid fandom with. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Totally. Well, okay, so for the last thing that I want to see is basically in Metroid Prime 4, I think I just want to play through essentially like the Death Star 2 sequence from Rise of Skywalker, from Star Wars Episode 9, Rise of Skywalker, but in Metroid
Okay.
Prime. Because
Okay. All right.
Okay, because I
So when they're on that like other Tatooine moon,
when they're on the Endor moon,
yeah.
and
Oh yeah, Endor, yeah.
and like there's that like out of control ocean,
Yeah.
and there's a giant like something in the middle of the ocean, and Samus has to like go out to it. She's climbing through this like creaky, weird like rundown.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
this is that survival horror like sequence, but it's like there's two things I love about this. One, I would love to just see that environment in a Metroid Prime game so I can like explore it, because I think it's like so beautiful but like haunting in that way that is perfect for Metroid Prime. And
Yes.
then yeah, like the idea of being able to crawl through this like abandoned whatever it ends up being, like space pirate
No, man,
ship, or
it's
like
got to
something
be
like
it's
that.
got to be an abandoned slash crashed Chozo warship. So like it's connected to who Samus is and
Oh
like
yeah,
her roots,
yeah.
and like she can sort of use that to like explore like the dark side of
And
where
it's
she
like
came from.
it's like wet, and there's like giant waves crashing outside. I mean, like
Oh
for
my
me,
god.
like I think like in Rise of Skywalker, like visually that's one of the most like
Yeah.
goosebumps inducing moments of that movie, like when Rey enters like the throne room,
When
and
she's holding
like
up the dagger just randomly and
and yeah, like that's like an environment that, I mean, I have talked all the time how I like love rainy levels, and so like yeah, it's raining, there's a giant ocean raging, she's in this
yeah.
spooky ship, I'm super into it. I'd love to see something like that in Metroid Prime 4.
Oh man. Okay, so what if there is like a thing where there are Chozo warships like heading into a planet, right? And you are like traveling between them, the extravehicular activity that I was describing before, and you make your way down to the surface of the planet onto a crashed ship in the ocean. Man, this is Mark. This is good.
And it carries on the grand tradition of Metroid games taking inspiration from like other pop culture.
Yeah, 100%. And like I feel like Star Fox picked up that mantle for a little while. Like Star Fox 64, famously all of those set pieces are either from Star Wars or Independence Day, like every single one. um but like yeah, we can just Metroid can take that up now. They've already done the Alien series, or at least the two good ones. And now they can borrow from other places.
Ooh, speaking of Star Fox, do you remember
Yeah.
the rumor that was running wild on the internet before the Wii U was announced that like the next Metroid game is going to be a Metroid / Star Fox crossover?
I do not remember this. Is that true?
It was true that it was a rumor.
Was it a
yes.
true rumor? Yeah. Interesting that neither of us had that on our list of things we wanted to see in Metroid Prime 4. Interesting.
That is interesting.
What would you do? Like, what is the reaction if we get like a Nintendo Direct tomorrow and it's like Metroid Prime 4 is Metroid Prime cross Star Fox? What do we do, Mark?
I'm imagining that like the way it's introduced is it's just like it's no like preamble. It just like fades up from black, and Samus is like in the first person walking through like a really like atmospheric environment, and then a like door slides open and in comes walking Star Fox team, and Fox McCloud is like has some like quippy thing like, man, who turned on the air in here? And then
reporting for duty, General, he'll say. Conversely, if they announce a new Star Fox game and then they're like, oh, also you can play as Samus in her gunship, I'd be like, yes.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
I will accept that. Samus is a guest character in the next Star Fox? Yes. All right, Mark, we have now described the perfect Metroid Prime game. Let's close this out. If you have any fun ideas for things you would want to see or not want to see in the next Metroid Prime game, you can always email us at Nintendo Cartridge Society at gmail.com. Mark, when do you think that game is coming out? Ever?
Ooh, good question. It's been 2 years since we've heard anything about it. I'm gonna say we won't hear anything until next year.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. Do you think there's any universe where Prime 4 and Breath of the Wild 2 come out in the same year?
Yes, I totally believe that because I don't think like
you don't think they care?
No, I just don't think Metroid. I think Metroid Prime 4 would be. I just don't know how big of a deal it would be. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Like it feels like a big deal to fans, but
it might. But
people
like
that won't hit forward, it won't.
Yeah, it kind of feels like a Fire Emblem Three Houses to me, where it's like, wow, like that's a cool game and it's going to sell like 3 million copies. But I don't know that it has the same like blockbuster status as like even a Luigi's Mansion 3. You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure. And it won't sell the 31 million copies that Animal Crossing did.
Right.
It's so many copies. Please rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts if you liked the episode. You can share it on Facebook or Twitter or wherever you share stuff. It helps us out tremendously. When you do, you can follow us on Twitter. I'm at Patrick_Ellers. Mark is at MKE Mitchell, and the show is at Nin Cart Society. We also have a Facebook page, which is just Nintendo Cartridge Society. Olivia Duncan made our logo. Our theme music is provided by 8-Bit Betty. You can get more of his music by going to 8bitbetty.com or by listening right now. For my co-host, Mark Mitchell, this is Patrick Ellers saying thank you for listening.
My name is Will Hines, and I am a ghostwriter, meaning I write other people's books for them. And I have a podcast called I Will Write Your Book, which are recordings of my meetings with my eccentric clients, such as a woman blocked after one sentence of a children's book about her dogs, a romance novelist who dislikes sex, and a man proud of having sampled everything in his local grocery store. This podcast has been described as fully improvised, played by some of the best comedians on the planet Earth. Hey, that's pretty good. That's I Will Write Your Book on Campfire Media.
Campfire.